Welcome everybody to Paleo Talks. We are on episode 36 now. So we've been really going at this for quite a while and just excited and thrilled to have Dr. Joaquin Arroyo Cabrales with us here today. Hey, Joaquin.
Hello, David, Chris, and Blaine.
And the whole world.
And Walsh, and the whole world, certainly.
Thousands of viewers. Yeah.
and just so excited to see you and see you're doing well, and to hear today about this extraordinary new mammoth site that's being discovered down there. So we're just blown away with that news.
Thank you, and certainly I hope to show you some nice views of the site that still is on ongoing research and not even an ongoing savage excavations, but we are hoping to do the best possible down there.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll jump over to David now, and he'll let everybody know again how the show works, and then we'll come back to Joaquin in just a second.
Absolutely. Welcome back, everybody. Same format that you've gotten familiar with. We're going to start with our guest presentation in just a minute. And then about halfway through, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. The goal is that the second half, right, after about a half hour, is led by audience Q&A. So at that time, we'll remind you to go ahead and put your questions in the Facebook chat. Or if you can't leave a comment on Facebook, head over to Gray Fossil Site on Twitter or Instagram, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. We've also got a full house of people here, so there may be some additional chatter with our whole group. So it should be a good discussion today.
All right, great. Again, we have Chris Widga with us as usual, our resident proboscidean expert, who will surely have some good things to discuss with us. And we also have Rich White joining us too, and he may jump on at some point here later to ask some questions. He's up at the Mammoth site now up in Hot Springs, South Dakota. Let's go on over to Joaquin. Again, we're coming to you from the Center of Excellence in Paleontology at East Tennessee State University here at Johnson City. And we work on projects all over the world, not just the Gray Fossil Site, and have been really fortunate to get to work with Joaquin on some projects in Mexico, collections in Mexico City, but also our shared project over in the Yucatan as well. I've known Joaquin for quite a while, and just a great pleasure to have you on here. So welcome again.
Thank you, Blaine, and thank you to David, Chris, and you for this kind of invitation to show up about this ongoing project in northern Mexico City.
Wow. And Joaquin, if you could just start by going ahead and showing your first slide and sharing that. And then the question we always like to ask to start off with is, how did you get into paleontology and becoming a paleontologist?
Well, that's a nice question. Actually, I did work with two well-known Mexican paleontologists, archaeologists, and myself could describe as a paleontologist and archaeologist, Nicole Alvarez and Oscar Polaco. And when I was studying biology at the school in Mexico City, both of them invited me to follow studies with them in doing field collecting of recent mammals. Mostly I was doing mammalogy work, but at the same time, both of them were already involved with working at INA, at this National Institute of Anthropology and History. And they both invited me to participate with them in research. And in fact, my initial research was with bats from Loltun Cave, that we have a large sample from there. So from there, I start to work with other animals. Certainly, still bats are my preferred animals, and I do much work with bat conservation. But certainly now with mammoths is another topic that is starting to be quite enjoyable and quite a big work to be done in Mexico for them.
And you also spent quite a bit of time up in the United States as well.
Yes, well, I did my master's and PhD in Texas State University under Eileen Johnson and Robert Baker, mostly actually as paleontology. I went originally, being a biology, I went to do a museum science master's and then follow in biology, the PhD, but working mostly as paleontology. So certainly I have spent quite much time. And I have been also, certainly, I will say, blessed with many of my colleagues from all over the world, many from the US and England, that had been able to visit our sites in Mexico. I will show one of those, Tocuila, where several of people like the late Laurie Agenbrod, Adrian Lister, Eileen Johnson, Dick Moll, all of them had visited our site. So it was great for us to have their visits.
All right. Well, thank you for that background, Joaquin. And well, let's just jump right into it and get into the giants and airplanes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Hello again, and thank you for allowing me to talk about this ongoing research in northern from Mexico City. I will show you later a map where the site is located. And certainly this is an important project, mostly because with this big airport being constructed, it has allowed us to be able to find a lot of remains of mammoths. So far, the archaeologists in charge of the savage excavation, the Dr. Ruben Manzanilla, he has mentioned over 20,000 bones found in the deposit and counting more. So certainly then will be many more. Well, I want to start with mentioning that Mexico is a mega diverse country. And as a mega diverse country, I refer to those that overall, counting those 12 or so countries in the mostly tropical areas, account for the 70% of worldwide species. And specifically for the Americas, we can mention a more practical definition, those countries that, at least in the boundaries, both marine and terrestrial boundary, account for 10% of the world species. Certainly that diversity is not just new, it comes from the past. Back in Mexico, we have remains of beings living 700 million years ago. And certainly for the time when the dinosaurs were in the high abundance back in the Mesozoic, and specifically in the Cretaceous time, we have a fair amount of different species. You can see here on the left side up a map showing how the small narrow land emerged at that time of what is currently Mexico. There were living several dinosaurs. And more recently, to the last glacial maximum, we have on the right a map showing that Mexico with the emerged continental shelf that at that time was animals could even walk over there. And the high diversity at that time, you can see below in this megafauna illustration with several animals, and certainly with the one we are dealing with, the mammoth, Colombian mammoth. Well, as mentioned, these animals were the largest, at least for the Pleistocene in the Americas, the proboscidea or pachyderms. These are these large size animals. You have an African elephant on the left and a reconstruction of how it looks the American mastodon on the right. These animals are very easy to identify with this big trunk that they possess, as well as this big tusk that correspond to the second incisor. Back in Mexico, at least, we had to be mentioning this once and again, because usually people think they are canines, colmillos they call it, but no, these are incisors from this animal, and those are the ones that grow. Well, these animals evolved since the Eocene, about 50 million years ago, with animals of the size of pig-like without the trunk, and from there were a big speciation of these animals. In fact, there's more than 160 different species or kinds that have been described. Many of those for the Miocene, about 20 to 8 million years ago. And even though they originate in Africa, later on they move to all over the world, as we see next. Here you have a map that Dr. Adrian Lister from the Natural History Museum in London very kindly shared with me for a museum we are preparing. The Proboscidea originate in Africa. You have it here on the left side of the slide on the top. I don't know if my arrow is shown in the presentation, but well, it is there. Then they move out of Africa into Eurasia, and you can see here a lot of recording sites. All of these correspond to sites that have been radiocarbon dated or dated in some other ways. This doesn't show all of the sites that are known for these animals. That probably are many more, and I know for at least for Mexico there are many more than for which we don't have dates actually. But well, you can see how they move from all Eurasia and when able to go into the Americas through the Bering Strait, probably during the different glaciations during the Pleistocene. Pleistocene, I refer this geologic period between 2.5 million years to 10,000, around 10,000 years ago. Other groups of Proboscidea, not just Elephantidae, moved into the Americas as well. There's another group, and we'll see a photo of those in a few minutes, that went even earlier than the Elephantidae, the Gomphotherids, and they were able to cross through the Panamanian Isthmus into South America, going into the south. One other issue I would like to mention is certainly we are talking about, and regularly we talk about this movement of animals from Eurasia into the Americas. We see the Proboscidea, we see the Artiodactyls, carnivores, but we very rarely talk about the movement other way from the Americas into the Eurasia, but we know of the camelids, of the equids that move it from the Americas into Asia. And certainly much more recently, around 50,000 years ago, there are some tests that have shown by colleagues in Russia and the United States that there had been movement of woolly mammoths back and forth through the Bering Strait. Now going into Mexico, when we start to have records of these big animals, and it seems to be since the early colonial period. In fact, there are writings showing that Cortés found some big bones that at the time they were not certain what they were. In fact, the different documents mentioned they were big humans living in Mexico. People refer as enormous humans. And we suppose there was a finding of a femur based on the description in eastern from Mexico City in the state of Tlaxcala. However, the specimen is not available anymore and it lost within the time. But since then, there have been writings about these animals. Also, in fact, in native cultures in Mexico, in some areas, there have been even the use of these bones. Recently, a colleague, Israel Lara, is close to publish a paper regarding the use of the bone of these animals in a way to cure some illnesses. Well, in Mexico, we have, as in most of North America, at least 3 different groups of proboscideans. 2 of those corresponding to animals already extinct, to families, the Mammuthidae, that refers to the real American mastodon that live in northeastern Mexico and central Mexico. You have a map on the left showing the distribution in North America. That just recently there was a paper based on genetics that show how there were movements in between population in northern and southern distribution of this animal. This animal entry at the same time that, or close to the elephantids, the mammoths, about 1.5 to 2 million years ago. We have also the Gomphotheris that I was referring to. This animal entry into the Americas much earlier, and actually there are records, Pliocene records, accounting like 6 to 4 million years ago. These animals characterized by these straight tusks that we can find, and the older animals have even tusks on the mandible. You can see a distribution in Mexico that goes along most of the tropical or subtropical areas, going south to Central and South America. Even in the Yucatan Peninsula, we have a records of those animals. And now what we are focusing on, the Columbine mammoth, Mammuthus columbi. This is the genus Mammuthus, is the one that entered into the Americas about 1.5 million, 2 million years ago as Mammuthus trogonteri, and it evolved into the species that occur in most of North America. You can see a map here showing how south it came. In fact, we have other records from the south going to Honduras and Nicaragua, and certainly we have much more records than what you are looking in the Mexican map, but these are just those that have presently geographic coordinates. Also, there were another 2 species of Mammuthus living in the Americas, one that entered very late, about 100,000 years. The woolly mammoth that I mentioned, it moved back and forward from Asia. It had evolved long before in Eurasia. And this animal just went down to northern United States. So we didn't have those in Mexico. And there's a dwarf animal that evolved in islands off the coast of Northern California, like Santa Rosa or San Miguel Islands, Mammuthus exilis. That was a dwarf animal. Well, as for Columbine Mammuthus, we know these were large animals. Probably the largest male could account for weight like 10 tons, and they may have measured about 4.5 meters high and could have arrived at 80 years. This is based on comparisons with recent elephants. These animals, elephantidae, even though they were extirpated were extinct from the Americas, elephants, as we know, still survive in Africa, 2 species, and Asia, 1 species. You have here a couple of photos of findings in one of the deposits in central Mexico, in the Basin of Mexico, called San Miguel Tocuila, that is where we had been glad that several colleagues had been able to visit. This site has come about 9 specimens that we have still many of those in situ. I want to show a few other quick slides about where findings of proboscidea has happened around the Basin of Mexico. Certainly one that probably people knows about is Valsequillo, where there were in the early 60s excavation, and there had been controversy about possible presence of early human. But at least we know of the presence of the 3 proboscidean families in here. Unfortunately, we don't have a complete stratigraphic control, so we aren't sure which ones were together or no. Also, in the lake basin, we have more mammoths that have been found within the years. In fact, all the basin, we have more than 70 sites that have been found. Certainly, mammoths in Mexico is one of the most common findings, and mostly in central Mexico with all the construction around Mexico City. And mammoths are an animal bones. The bones of these animals are pretty well separated from any other known animal for the people. Probably people could confuse bison or camel or horse with recent domestic animals, but certainly these big animals, even from the Gomphotheres that are smaller, wouldn't be confused, and people usually call for them. We have findings in northern, the Basin of Mexico. Here you have a few of them basin, in Hidalgo State, in Singiluca, or the northern part of the city, actually right on the tip of this map, showing the Ciudad de Mexico state currently as it is now. In Milpalta, we have another. In both cases were isolated animals in high elevations that we believe that they were probably random young males moving around either for looking for mates or for food. And then we are right to where we are currently working. This is again the central part of Mexico. Here you have here Mexico City, Ciudad de Mexico is currently, the state is not anymore Distrito Federal. And to the north of the city, it is this red star where we have the deposit where the airport is being built and where we have found all these remains. In fact, on the right, you have this slide showing the possible lakes at the time when the animals could have been living, and humans as well. And most of this is already dry, but certainly we have evidence on the sediments on how the lakes look like. I show SL for Santa Lucia, where is the airport is being built. Certainly, I also marked Tultepec because this is another site that in the past 2 years had been mentioned a few times because of the possible of finding some traps that we are still studying. Certainly, this is part of our present study. Will look for any evidence or this possible traps. So back in 2019, at the end of the year, it was a savage project by colleagues from INA, focusing on this kind of projects in order to work along with the military people doing the construction of the airport. I will show a couple of videos in order to show very quickly how things are being done currently. This was nicely prepared by the military people. And well, here's the country, and here's they will zoom into the area of the construction. Here is the construction area. I look for the equivalent for these hectares. If you multiply for 100, it will turn into acres. So it certainly is a big area, and it says 260 findings, and you could see, sorry that it was so, and you will see all these findings. These are the findings at the time. Right now, the colleague Ruben Manzanilla had mentioned over 300 findings in the site. And you have one of those. You can see that this is a very complete specimen. We have a few of those within the deposits, for the most part isolated of any other findings. And let me show you. I don't know if this is, it is the second one. Sorry. Going with from the military people, they set up for us so we could present those. In this one, they show me how the excavations are done and the main reason why we are finding so many animals. These big excavation sites that are known like landing areas, they dig down to more than 20 meters in order to secure rock to move into the construction areas. And in doing so, they have been finding a lot of remains at different levels, certainly mostly 2-3 meters below the ground presently, but certainly lower. You can see in this case, this animal is dispersed, and there is not just mammoths, that there is more than one. Also, there's other irregular animals like camels, horses, bison that occur regularly, as I mentioned before, in the with mammoths from Basin of Mexico into northern part of the country by the Mexican plateau. Well, we were very fortunate to come in this endeavor with the help of military people doing the construction, and because of that they have digital equipment to being able to do the topography of the deposits, to be able to set the archaeological grid, to be able to in fact, to get the drone views of many deposits in order to do the reconstruction. So that has helped a lot for us to do the recording. Again, we have more than 300 points of where mammoth remains have been recorded.
So Joaquin, because this is being funded by the government, it's like you have this massive amount of funding to do an excavation almost.
Well, certainly we have been funded mostly for doing the savage excavation. Fortunately, most of the participating institution, and right here you can see some of those from where colleagues are participating, we will be able to do some expenses in order to support the research. And also the military people very kindly, they have set some funds for us to initiate the research. And anyway, probably further in research, we will have to get to secure other funds. But for now, we were able to secure money from the military people. So we have already paid, for, like say, for some radiocarbon days at direct AMS, and some other analysis that had already been made. We still need to submit the samples because since we started this project, and you can see some of the areas we are covering with the specialists in those, we listed very important Mexican specialists that have worked on the quaternary. We had only been able to do sampling in the deposits. We usually go every other week to the deposit and just for a couple of days and do sampling from the big deposit. You saw these big profiles where we had been able to describe very carefully, the colleagues, the geologists and sedimentologists have been able to describe very carefully all the materials. We have lake deposit, we have mud deposit, we have paleo soils, we have ash deposit. Actually, ash is pretty well spread all over the deposit. We have these big volcanic events like the Popocatépetl, but also there are monogenic volcanoes closer to the deposits that are being shown. All this is studied by the different colleagues, but again, for the most part right now has been collected the samples. They are waiting for the laboratories to open and being able to analyze carefully. Even the samples that we have been securing for doing isotopic or DNA studies, we have some of those already secure, but we need to wait for further analysis. And for example, just I was mentioning, certainly the taphonomic study will be quite important because, as shown before, we have animals that were all dispersed in a big area, while other ones isolated, almost complete. So we need to do the careful taphonomic study and figure how this happened to the animals. Certainly, we have some hypotheses, either animals going to the lake to drink, coming and probably dying there for natural or anthropogenic reasons, or we have the volcanoes doing eruptions and probably even killing in some cases, or animals even getting stuck in the mud, that as mentioning with the isolated animals, that might happen the case for those ones that we have found almost complete, that they were found like they were lying just on the side. Still, we are far from be able to have a good idea of what happened. Certainly, other other important study will be the possible modified bones by human presence. We know that, well, certainly we think these animals will be close to on age to what the presence in the basins are for human around 14,000 years ago, 14 to 12,000 years ago. We think, based on the volcanic ashes, that this animal may be distributed between 14 into 20 or more. We still need to get those AMS dates from the materials. but still we think there could be some interactions between human and mammoths, and certainly is in the basin with most of them has been found in the country. So these are just some example of those. So further study should show us better control of this. And just coming to the end, I would like to show probably the most frequent question we have presently and certainly in the next few years, how this animal died, how is that there are so many. First, we need to mention that certainly we have many findings, but also we are probably accounting for many years in the deposits. Again, we don't know yet, but certainly we could be speaking of about 1,000 of years when all these, at least 300 so-called animals could have been deposited. But also there's other possible reasons, both natural, like animal stuck in the mud, probably volcanism, even the meteor hypothesis that in the past 15 years or so has been mentioned that, and we have one of the deposits in the basin that has shown possible nano molecules that the colleagues working this has mentioned as evidence of this meteor, or we have possible also presence of human that could be either doing active hunting or doing scavenging of animals that they may die in the mud or they may be close to die. So we don't know. And even more recently, as you may remember, this mass death of elephants that occur in Zimbabwe, we are wondering after looking at this, what could have been happening if something like this happened in this area. That's something that we still need to study. We have a group of colleagues working with the organic residues attached to the bones, so hopefully they can give you some light on this. So anyway, what we certainly look, and you can see the slide right on the middle having the Pleistocene fauna and a more recent fauna is there's a depletion of all these big animals occurring at the end of the Pleistocene into medium-sized animals. Here in Mexico, we won't have larger than mule deer, grizzly bear that it is still part of that present, jaguars or pumas, and no larger than those. So certainly that's what we have presently. And just
Joaquin,
yes, sir.
Talking about the carnivorans, are you seeing any examples of scavenging on the bones?
Well, in the deposit, and along with this colleague Alejandro Lopez, who fortunately will be join very soon you in training for the preparation of these materials and also Hoyo Negro materials. We have looked at some bones that show some punctuated features that it seems to us that could be made by carnivore. Certainly, for example, in Tocuila, that is no more than 20 kilometers far from Santa Lucia, we have carnivore gnawing. So I will think we have, in this deposit, we have very few remains of carnivores. We have a very nice saber-tooth canine of a young animal is quite interesting because to me looking like initially like a claw, but fortunately Greg McDonald showed us that certainly this is a young saber-tooth cat. We have some canid bones. Other animals I mentioned already, camels, bison, and that's why I said this is like you have some of those. You have the big elephant, camels that we had, bison, horses probably of two kinds that are known from central Mexico. Even we may have a sloth, a Mylodon sloth, for which Greg is also excited to study. In fact, it seems to be a young animal. So that's the state of what we are presently. And well, thank you very much for listening me. I just want to thank some of the institutions that have helped us. Certainly, I would like to point out to Sergio de la Rosa, right on the bottom right, because he very kindly has prepared several of the illustrations that we are using, both in presentation as well as in the forthcoming museum that hopefully sometime in the future we can show you to that. And well, I just want to ask you to keep safe. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Joaquin. Before we get to some of the audience questions, I wanted to clarify what your thoughts are on how many mammoths have been recovered, or what's the minimum number of individual mammoths so far, and also how large do you think this deposit is? You're probably just hitting part of it, I'm guessing. It's not, you're not seeing the whole deposit.
No, exactly. Right now, where we are working, and is where the military people are digging, is mostly on the edges of what the actual airport is going to be built. So it is just a part of those edges. Certainly, the lake deposits are further away. So we really hope that will help us in the future to have some excavated that we can do a more detailed work. Certainly, in savage excavations, you could figure there's a lot of work done. At the same time, my colleague Ruben Manzanilla has more than, I will say, probably almost 40 teams of archaeologists and all the people helping them working in savage, all these sites. So I would say in terms of minimum number of individuals, I would mention probably at least 100 minimum number. Yes, we have a fair amount. We don't know at this point exactly. We still need to make the account, but certainly based on how many mandibles, how many isolated teeth, and certainly counting just, for example, lower right molars, that can help us to have an idea. And we have all kind of ages. In fact, for my surprise, maybe Chris have seen that scene, and I'm sure some of the people in the audience have seen. I had never seen a mandible on the size of what I can say, a skunk, and this is a mammoth mandible. I haven't seen that ever, and we have that from the deposit. No, it's like 5 centimeters, Chris. It just.
Wow.
In the future, we should be able to show that. Yes, no, this is an amazing deposit. We have certainly young animals that we have ages like 1 or 2 years, but no, this is small. I certainly wonder if it's a neonate. So it's small. I will see. Let's get a photo of those, but it's just amazing. So we will be able to have a good life history study of all these animals. Again, there are studies ongoing on isotopes, and certainly my colleague Victor Perez-Campos is focusing on doing this by ages. So because we have animals of different ages, certainly sex will be also considered, and also we have to do genetics. Some colleagues from the Instituto Nacional de Medicina Genómica, especially Federico Sanchez Quinto, they are focusing on this. So, but again, right now, very few analyses have been done, mostly separation of samples that my colleagues of geologists and sedimentologists have been separating, but just to do further study.
Just a reminder to the audience out there to send in your questions. I know we have quite a few of them coming in, and we'll get to those in just a second. But Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, well, I mean, Joaquin, this is a fantastic site. I mean, there's so much material, there's so much diversity in terms of the mammoth fauna. But ultimately, it's also still a salvage site. So ultimately, they're going to put a runway on top of it or a building on top of it. Do you have like a window of time before they say, okay, done, you're out? We've got to move forward. How much more time do you have?
You are completely right. Certainly, probably we don't have more than half this year in order to accomplish the savage excavation. Certainly, again, fortunately, the INA and Sedena is the military people in Mexico, military ministry, have agreed to set a museum with a collection along with it. In fact, the collection building is separated from the museum. So that is wonderful because we will be able to curate in a good condition, but also we will have some areas, as mentioned before, that have not been excavated, in fact, part of the equipment team that is working with that, there are specialists in geophysics profile work, so they will be able to set some equipment to see where else we can find more remains.
Do you think there's any chance there'll be an exhibit in situ anywhere?
Well, that's certainly, we wanted to have, in fact, one kind of geologic window to show these 20 meters profiles, but unfortunately, because of the way the museum is being constructed, is built, we probably won't have that at this point. Hopefully, in the future, after certainly working with all this savage material, as Chris mentioned, that we just have no more than 6 months to be able to do all the savage of what is being exposed so far. We'll be able to set some projects in order to do a detailed work and then have that exhibit in situ. Certainly in Toquila, as you saw the photo, we had been trying to keep the materials, and so far we have been successful. It is already almost 25 years since we found this deposit, and they have been keeping in fair shape, I will say.
I think we have a lot of questions that are piling up. So if we could go over to some of those with David and Chris, if you have any you want to ask.
Sure, we've got plenty of questions coming in on Facebook. So a reminder, everybody, go ahead, send in your questions. It looks like a lot of the questions have already been answered a bit in your discussion. There were people asking about age structure and sex of the specimens. Donna asked a question similar to what Blaine was just getting at. Donna says, where are the remains being prepared, and will the government fund a display at the airport?
Well, certainly the remains are curated in the area of the Air Force base. This was originally an Air Force base, and they have all kind of buildings for different usages. So we have been located in some of the storage places they used to have. Not the best situ for the bone curation, but certainly is what it was available at the time. In fact, the collections are separated in 3 buildings because there were not enough space in. Didn't thought there were going to be so many bones. As I mentioned, over 20,000 bones. So anyway, and mostly mammoth bones. So anyway, you can figure the huge size that you require for the space. Certainly the new place where the collections will be set, it will have all the places to be able to do the curation, but also some research. In fact, at least getting samples from materials, don't have to move. That was a decision that was taken by both institutions, the National Institute, mostly based on what the president of the Paleontology Council suggested, not to be moving the collection all over places, because certainly it can be very destructive. So, and yes, there's already an agreement between both institutions to set, for one thing, the exhibit, a museum, a dedicated exhibit, but also the collection, but also right in the area of the arrivals in the airport, there will be an exhibit. In fact, this past week had been focusing on discussing of this. This is part of what we can do while we are still in situ, inside offices. No have to go to the field, but we can work it inside. We have been working on what will go in those areas. So certainly people using the airport will be able to first have a initial look on what has been found, and later, if there's time, going to the.
What a great day for paleontology. I mean, this is a huge tourism opportunity and a huge educational opportunity.
Yes, it is, and certainly that's why the research team has been really concerned on getting as much samples as possible. Again, all these land, I don't know if that's the right word, land deposits from where they move this rock to other areas. Once they move the rock, then they start to fill it up with materials they are moving from the construction area. So we have to be sort of fast in trying to get the records of all the samples from these big profiles. Even those 20 meters, they fill it very quickly. In 1 week away from our visits, you can see very much changes in the area. They are working 24/7 days, so that's why it really work is. But we have been able to secure the opportunity to do that collecting, and also the bone material has been secured in the best way possible.
Joaquin, everything
Yes.
about this project is gigantic. You know, the mammoths are huge. The spaces that you're opening up are huge. Can you give us an idea of how many people are working on the paleontology here? I mean, beyond just the scientists, but the people who are watching the backhoes and that sort of thing. Are we talking, you know, over 100? Or, I mean, a lot of paleontologists on the ground by the sounds of it.
Well, certainly there's again, there's every team, mostly been this originally an archaeological salvage excavation, that it was how it originated, and mostly again because still in Mexico most of the mammoth diggings are believed to be able to be archaeology rather than paleontology, even though our research project is through paleontology. But anyway, the excavation teams have a couple of archaeologists and have a team of about 10 people. So must be, if there's 40, as I mentioned, there must be like 400 people working. Yes, there's, and my colleague, Ruben Manzanilla, he has some assistant helping him to look at the different deposits, but certainly the decisions in regard to how to dig some deposits he has to take it for one thing. And then Alejandro, who is in charge of the bone preservation, he has to take this decision in the field of how to remove the materials into the collection area. So he has to look at them and see if they have to be covered with some material in order to move it, if they can be moving without. Certainly they have been trying to do the best possible. The 40 archaeologists, pretty well, they are trained, but certainly all other people are hired by the military people. So most of them doesn't have the experience. Now they are getting it, but on the field, so you can imagine, sometimes it goes slow. But yes, it's a gigantic endeavor, I can tell you.
We've got a handful of people asking questions about the deposit itself. So Emil, Jenny, and Isma have all been asking, are these fossils all being found in the same layer? Is there a sense of how much time is represented by these deposits? And I know you talked about this a little bit earlier, but on top of that, is there an idea as to why you're finding so many in this one place?
Yes, well, that's what I mentioned. This is a frequent question. That is one thing that certainly we are scheduled to discuss every Sunday. We have a research team meeting, and this, right, that question is coming this next Sunday. So anyway, one thing is certainly we don't have exactly an idea how much time interval we are considering. Certainly based on what the volcanologists know, based on the ash deposit, we are counting for at least 10,000 years. Certainly from the larger eruptions into the latest Pleistocene, Holocene, probably is less because some of the larger eruption came around 14,000 years. So at least there's 4,000 years accountable there. But there are other deposits below that 14,000 year ash. So certainly we are talking of a larger time interval. And in regard to how they came, is what I was mentioning. One thing is this time interval range. Also, the possibility of animals being got stuck in the mud. And well, one idea that some of the paleontologists have mentioned is and that will need to the answer by some like Gary Hazel, Adrian Lister, that know more about the elephants. If one of these animals being stuck, some other animals will die around it because of keeping around a big mom. Yeah, but that's one thing that still we cannot answer because we need to study all the complete deposit. Right now, we are trying to save as much data as possible from the excavations. So we are still far to be able to answer. And again, there's also the possibility of human participating in some of the animals' deaths, either at the time they were already stuck in the mud, or the active hunting that probably was more difficult, but still it certainly is possible.
All right. Did anyone else in our group here have questions they wanted to ask while we see if more questions come in?
I see that there's one asking about the type of mammoth, and I think you mentioned that they were Columbian mammoth exclusively. Is that something you feel pretty confident about?
Well, certainly we have checked the identifications and for a few other specimens, not all of them, but certainly we believe it's Columbian mammoth. And again, based on what mostly Adrian Lister and our colleagues have been publishing, most of the previous finding, even in the Mexican, in the Basin of Mexico, it was mentioned at some point that Mammoths high was identified, but presently we consider most of the findings in Mexico as Columbian mammoth. I don't think it has ever been any finding of woolly mammoth. Certainly, at some point there were imperial mammoth and Jeffersonian mammoth mentioned in the deposit, but based on what Adrian proposed and based on further study of those specimens like those from Laguna de las Cruces and Cedral, all of those are Columbian mammoths.
And did you say that it looks like you're getting all different ages, including tiny, tiny babies?
Yes. Again, we have dated some animals already based on this elephant age table in around 60 years, and there's all the way down to 2 or 3 years. And we haven't tried yet this very teeny specimen. For one thing, it was one on the last test finding in the deposits, and neither Alejandro nor I had been looking at that more carefully, but certainly. And we have even some molars that it seems to be those that were already worn and discarded on the mandible. So we have different sizes of those already as well. So yes, I think that's quite exciting because certainly we will have, in fact, one of the exhibits for the museum is planning to set different ages of mandibles to show the ontogeny. In fact, we probably not the original, but we will try to have the teeny one there.
So it sounds like everything that is in this site or in this area are Columbian mammoths. But you said that you also have other proboscideans in Mexico. You have gomphotheres and you have mastodons. Do you have any sites in Mexico where you get kind of ecological contemporaneity with these different proboscideans, where you might have mastodons and mammoths together?
Well, certainly one of those is Fin del Mundo, where there are gomphotheres, there are mastodon, and there are a mammoth. Certainly not necessarily contemporaneous, but it is there. They are there. We have also, as I mentioned in Valsequillo, we have remains of those 3 animals, but Valsequillo is quite difficult because most of the material doesn't have complete stratigraphic information, so we won't be able to find where exactly they come from. There's a deposit in northeastern Mexico, nearby Monterrey, actually, where mastodon and mammoth were found together in the same deposit. And I don't recall that they probably around 25,000 years old. That's one of the few where they have. For that specimen that was reported in the mastodon study by Emil Karpinski and Grant a few months ago. That was we have a specimen from Hiko
yeah.
that is in a different deposit. In fact, I as much as I have been searching for the information, that's an isolated specimen, and there were no findings nearby of any mammoths or gunfooters. Gunfooters in the Basin of Mexico have not been found. There's some remains to the north, what is the Tequisquiapan area, and some remains to the south. So mostly out of the what is the basin. Mostly the basin is there are found more temperate animals.
Dick Mole just asked a question. Good question here. Joaquin, are you considering organizing an international mammoth conference in Mexico so we can visit this site? And just to remind everybody, this is the new international airport, so it would be ideal.
Well, that's quite a tempting idea. Certainly, as Dick and
We'll just go ahead and record it right now. Just say yes.
No, we 2 or 3 years ago we were trying to have it back in Mexico. Certainly, we were not aware at that time of this. Also, was people from Russia, as far as I remember, and later it was decided on India was the only ones that decided, and unfortunately was postponed last year. So certainly, if the India comes along this or next year, probably in 2 or 3 years, we could be able to organize it. In fact, having the museum right in there, and it is already, as far as we know, we have been mentioned by the military people, there's a lot of plans to having hotels nearby this international airport, so could be quite convenient. So I haven't thought of that. Dick is good in doing in proposing those things. I agree. I will think about it. I won't say yes already, but
and there are a lot of people asking about the age structure. You know, is it more of a female group? Is it a diverse group? Are there more young? I'm guessing it's too early to say a lot about that.
Yes, mostly we have medium to no age animals. Certainly we have small ones, but not that many. And unfortunately, most of the small animals have been found quite fragmented on the deposits. Very few, we don't have really a complete young animal. We have complete older animals, as you saw one, we have several of those, but no any young. We have some mandibles. Most of the young skulls are all destroyed, unfortunately. Probably they couldn't cope with I don't know, the sediments pressure. I don't know. That's what we still need to work that. But again, certainly we have those. I will say mostly middle to old age is what we have.
Joaquin, we've got a question here from Mauricio Anton, our friend Mauricio, who asks, what kind of environment did these Mexican mammoths live in? Was it open grasslands?
Well, based on what we know for mammoths in the basin, not from this side because this is still ongoing, the analysis, but from other sides that could be of same geologic age, let's say late Pleistocene, based on the stable isotopes that we have proceeded. There were this grassland in the bottom of the lake, and there were a temporary forest on the hills, let's say, on the sides. So we have both. That's quite in the bottom. Probably we find more of these grassland animals. Certainly going into the hills, they have been found in some other animals, like some glyptodons. Canids have been found mostly on the hillside. Even some bear, black bear as well. So there were on the bottom these grassland animals, and on the hillsides other vegetation, more temperate. And based on what is known from the vegetation, mostly some colleagues from UNAM has been doing a lot of work in Chalco Lake. They have very well reconstructed the vegetation. Even Picea was found in Picea trees were found that currently are just to the north in northern part of Mexico.
All right. Well, I think we are just about at time. What do you think, Blaine?
Yeah, that should wrap it up.
All right. Well,
Any other questions we want to throw in there, Chris? Or all right. Well, thank you again, Joaquin. Thanks so much. This is really exciting, and I think we're all looking forward to traveling down to Mexico City as soon as we can.
Okay, I will write that note, and thank you very much to all you and to all the viewers. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.